Hey, December the 9th, and I have to admit I did take a very short cut. Here's my lamb. All I did was remove the ram's horns, and here's my lamb. So, looking marvellous, I think. I'm sure yours is so much better. Why a lamb? Let's find out. God had sent 9 plagues to Egypt because of Pharaoh's refusal to let God's people go. Pharaoh's heart was hardened towards God, and although his own people were suffering from these plagues, he would not give in. But God knew what would change his heart, and this had always been God's plan. God told Moses to go to Pharaoh again and tell him that if he did not let God's people go that day at midnight, all the firstborn males in all of Egypt would die. The firstborn male animal from each mother animal, the firstborn son from the Egyptian farmer, the firstborn son from the Egyptian rulers. On and on it would go. In all of Egypt, for all living animals and people, the firstborn son would be killed that very night unless Pharaoh let God's people go. Pharaoh was told this, and he had a firstborn son. But still his heart was hardened towards God. He sent Moses and Aaron away, refusing to let God's people go. But this plague was different. There was a promise for God's people in it. God told Moses to tell all his people that they needed to sacrifice a spotless, perfect boy lamb that evening, and then paint the doorposts of each of their houses with the blood of that lamb. They would then all gather together that night and feast on the meat from the animals they had sacrificed, thanking God that he'd provided and trusting him that what he was about to do. Then they were all to be dressed for travel, sandals on their feet and staffs in their hands, with the blood of the lamb painted on their doorposts. A plague of death would go through the land that night, but God promised that it would not pass over anywhere there was a doorpost covered with the blood of the spotless boy lamb. So all the Egyptians' firstborn children would be killed, but all God's people would be saved. They would be protected from the plague of death. God's people did just as Moses instructed them to do, and just as he always does, God did exactly what he said he would do. It was not yet morning when they were screaming and crying like no one had ever heard through all of Egypt, as family members woke up and discovered that their fathers or sons or brothers had been killed. Any who were the firstborn. Yet it was silent in the homes of God's people, as not one person had died. God's people knew they would always remember that night as the night God protected them by having death pass over their homes. They would call it the Passover, and it would remind them always of how God kept his promise to save them through the blood of a perfect lamb. So it was a celebration for God's people, but for Pharaoh it was definite punishment. Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron at once. He told them to take God's people, all their belongings and all their animals, and go. He told them to be gone and to ask God to bless him. The Egyptians were eager for God's people to leave too. When God had told his people to ask the Egyptians for gold and silver, they gave God's people all they had. And so that very day, even without time to cook food for the journey, God's people all gathered together, and Moses and Aaron led them out of Egypt. God had spoken from a burning bush and told Moses that he would get his people out of Egypt. God had said that his greatness would be shown even though Pharaoh's heart was hard. God had told Moses that he would be able to lead the people, that they would listen. It had been difficult and scary at times, and it had definitely been gross at times. But God had always done exactly what he had promised. He had saved his people through the blood of a lamb, and now it was time for them to begin the journey to the land he had promised them. So that is why we have a lamb. Let's pop the lamb just here under the star. There we go. So the challenge for tomorrow is, now in Moses' time there weren't any books, there weren't any writing books or writing paper. So things were written down on stone. So tomorrow your challenge is to draw or to build some stone, what we'd call stone tablets, something that could be written on, carved on with writing. So I will leave that to you as a challenge. So we had a shepherd yesterday, and look, he wouldn't be a shepherd if he didn't have his sheep. So we've got a couple of sheep, shepherds, Mary, Joseph, donkey, angel. Okay, so today, our Christmas story. And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. So Joseph, there he is there, because he was from the line of David, had to go to Bethlehem. Okay, so let's finish with a prayer. Dear Lord God, thank you that you have promised to protect your people, and as we heard from the story, that's exactly what you did. You gave Pharaoh a chance to let his people go, but he chose not to. And because he did stuff that hurt you, that he turned away from you, Lord, he was punished. Thank you, though, God, that because Moses and your people followed the instructions, they were saved, and you rescued them into the land that you have promised them. Amen. See you tomorrow.